They were the internet's golden couple, glamorous, successful, and hopelessly in love. Their romance played out like a modern-day fairy tale, every milestone meticulously documented for millions to see. From their picture-perfect engagement to the extravagant wedding that had social media swooning, Omari Langston and Zaire Monroe seemed to have it all. Wealth, beauty, influence, together, they were unstoppable. But behind the filters and carefully curated perfection, cracks had already begun to form. And on their honeymoon, a luxurious getaway meant to mark the beginning of forever, those cracks split wide open. By sunrise, Zaire Monroe was dead. A bloodstained suite. A frantic 911 call. A husband standing over his wife's lifeless body, his hands shaking, his clothes soaked in red. How did a love story that captivated the world unravel into a crime scene? Was this a crime of passion, or something far more sinister? As the shocking truth unfolded, one question remained: when love and betrayal collide, how far will someone go before reaching their breaking point? Before we dive into the dark twists of this tragic case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales of love, lies, and deadly secrets. Zaire Monroe was the kind of woman people couldn't take their eyes off. Born into privilege, she moved through the world with effortless grace, flaunting a life most could only dream of. She was the daughter of a wealthy business tycoon and a former supermodel, raised in a world where luxury wasn't just a privilege, it was a birthright. From a young age, she understood the power of image. Every strand of her silk-pressed hair was always in place, every outfit curated to perfection, and every move designed to captivate. She wasn't just another rich girl. She had built a brand around herself, a lifestyle empire that millions followed with bated breath. Every Instagram post, every carefully staged TikTok video, every appearance at elite events added to the illusion of perfection. People saw her as the embodiment of beauty, success, and confidence. But what truly set her apart was her ability to mix modern glamour with old-school values. She preached loyalty in relationships, the importance of femininity, and the sacredness of marriage. Her fans adored her. Women wanted to be her. Men wanted to have her. But for all her influence, Zaire had secrets she had learned to keep well hidden. Omari Langston was a man who didn't chase fame, but it followed him anyway. Born into a family of self-made real estate moguls, he inherited not just wealth but the discipline and ruthlessness that built an empire. While other men flaunted their riches, Omari was reserved, calculated. He didn't need to speak much to command attention, his presence alone was enough. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice, yet people listened. Women were drawn to him, but he never entertained meaningless distractions. His focus was always on the bigger picture: his legacy. Marriage, to him, wasn't just about love, it was about building something that lasted. A partnership. A dynasty. When his parents introduced him to Zaire, he saw potential. She was stunning, poised, and well-connected. On paper, she was everything he needed in a wife. But Zaire didn't see Omari the way he saw her. For all her talk about marriage and loyalty, love had never been part of the equation for her. This was just another role to play, another chapter in the story she had carefully constructed for the world to believe. Omari was the perfect husband on the surface, rich, powerful, desirable, but he wasn't the one she truly wanted. And that secret desire? It had already led her down a dangerous path, one she never thought would come back to haunt her. Their engagement was a spectacle. A sunset proposal on a private yacht, captured from every perfect angle. The ring, an 8-carat masterpiece, glittered under the flashing lights of paparazzi cameras. Fans gushed over the romance, calling it the love story of the century. Every magazine, every blog, every social media page was flooded with their flawless images. The world believed in their fairy tale. Omari, despite knowing their marriage had been arranged, held on to hope. He was a man who built his life on control, on turning things to his advantage. He was determined to make Zaire love him, to build something real with her. He ignored the warnings, the small red flags that whispered that Zaire wasn't as committed as she claimed to be. Love, he believed, could be earned. But love was never on Zaire's mind. The wedding was $1 million affair, a grand production broadcasted to millions. Every detail was flawless, from the designer gown to the breathtaking venue. They exchanged vows under crystal chandeliers, kissed in front of a sea of cameras, and danced the night away under the illusion of happiness. The internet exploded with admiration. #The Langstons was the #1 trending topic worldwide. But beneath the surface, something was already rotting. Because just days before that fairy tale wedding, Zaire had done something that no amount of money, no perfect Instagram post, and no public illusion could erase. And the proof of it? It was sitting quietly in a digital file, waiting for the moment that would set everything on fire. Omari Langston had always been a man of control. He built his empire with precision, calculated every move, ensured that nothing, could shake the foundation of his life. But as he stood before the mirror on the morning of his wedding, fastening the diamond cufflinks Zaire had gifted him, his phone vibrated against the dresser. A message. No sender. Just a single video file. His brows furrowed as he clicked play. The moment the footage started, the breath left his lungs. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, his bride. Zaire. Half-dressed. Her silk gown hiked up. Her thighs wrapped around him. Tariq Miles. Omari's jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The video was explicit. Every gasp, every desperate moan, every movement that belonged to him, was shared with another man. Tariq's grip on her body, the way he whispered in her ear, the hunger in her touch. She wasn't just cheating. She was giving herself away. Omari's fingers curled around the phone, his knuckles turning white. The betrayal was absolute. Unforgivable. He wanted to hurl the phone against the wall. Smash it. Destroy any evidence of this sickening reality. But instead, he just stood there, watching every second. Because Omari was not a man who reacted. He was a man who planned. By the time the video ended, his heartbeat had slowed. His breathing was steady. He exhaled. Pocketed the phone. Adjusted his tie. And walked down the aisle. The wedding was flawless. Zaire was breathtaking in her custom gown, her smile radiant, her hands warm as she slid the wedding band onto Omari's finger. The cameras flashed, guests sighed in admiration, the world watched as the golden couple sealed their love with a kiss. And Omari played his role to perfection. He gazed at her like she was his universe. Pulled her close like she was his greatest treasure. Whispered sweet nothings in her ear that sent shivers down her spine. And when they danced, he twirled her across the floor with effortless grace, his hands firm at her waist. Zaire never suspected a thing. Not when he kissed her forehead. Not when he made a toast about loyalty and forever. Not even when his grip on her fingers lingered just a little too long. To everyone watching, they were the epitome of love. To Omari, it was the calm before the storm. Because tonight, on their wedding night, Zaire Monroe was going to learn exactly who she married. The private villa was a dream, a secluded paradise floating on turquoise waters, the kind of place people fantasized about but never touched. Soft candlelight flickered across the pristine white sheets, casting golden shadows over the luxurious honeymoon suite. The scent of fresh roses and vanilla drifted through the air, mixing with the salt from the ocean breeze. Outside, the waves whispered against the wooden stilts of the villa. But inside? Inside, the devil was waiting. Zaire Monroe stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the delicate straps of her white lace lingerie. It clung to her curves in all the right places, leaving just enough to the imagination. She ran a hand through her soft curls, letting them tumble down her shoulders, framing her perfectly made-up face. She had been waiting for this moment. Their first night as husband and wife. The final step to solidify their love. Her lips curled into a satisfied smile as she turned toward the bed, expecting to find Omari gazing at her with hunger, ready to claim her as his own. But he wasn't. He sat on the edge of the bed, hunched forward, his phone in his hand. The blue light from the screen cast eerie shadows across his chiseled jawline. His expression was unreadable, cold, unmoving. Zaire's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. "Omari?" she said softly, stepping toward him. He didn't answer. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the distant crashing of waves. Then she heard it. A woman's moans. Loud. Desperate. Familiar. Her own voice. Zaire's blood ran cold. She saw it then, the screen. The video. Her and Tariq. The way he touched her. The way she melted for him. The way she betrayed her husband before ever saying "I do." Zaire's breath hitched. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Omari. I can explain." He lifted his eyes to meet hers, his face terrifyingly still. "Explain what, Zaire?" His voice was chillingly calm, but it carried something dark underneath. Something lethal. She swallowed hard. It was a mistake." Omari let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head as he set his phone on the nightstand. "A mistake?" he repeated. She reached for him, her manicured fingers trembling. "I love you, I do." It was just. He pulled away so sharply that she nearly lost her balance. Omari's breathing slowed. His pulse pounded in his temples. "You love me?" His voice dropped lower. "Tell me, did you love me when he had you up against that wall? When you were screaming his name? Did you love me then, Zaire?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. He stepped forward. She stepped back. The air between them turned suffocating, thick with unspoken rage. Omari inhaled deeply, his jaw flexing. "You walked down the aisle," he murmured. "You looked me in the eyes. You swore to love me, honor me, be faithful to me." He trailed off, his fingers curling into tight fists. She saw it. The shift. His restraint cracked. Then, without warning, he struck. The first slap sent her stumbling into the nightstand. A glass candle shattered on the floor. Zaire gasped, holding her cheek. "Omari, please." But he wasn't listening. He had snapped. The second hit came fast, harder. His fist connected with her jaw. She cried out, falling onto the bed, her hands clawing at the sheets, desperate to escape. "You humiliated me," he seethed, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her toward him. "You made a fool out of me." His knuckles slammed into her ribs. A scream ripped from her throat as the impact knocked the air from her lungs. She scrambled backward, kicking wildly, fighting to break free. "Stop. Omari, please." But the fury inside him was uncontrollable, unstoppable. Blow after blow, he unleashed everything, the rage, the humiliation, the unbearable ache of knowing the woman he gave his life to had given herself to someone else. Zaire choked on sobs, her hands flying up in a weak attempt to shield herself. Then, a sickening crack. The back of her skull slammed against the marble floor. Her body twitched. Then stilled. Silence. Omari stood over her, chest heaving. His knuckles were bloody. His breath ragged. Zaire lay motionless, her once flawless face unrecognizable, bruised, swollen, lifeless. He took a shaky step back, staring at his hands. He hadn't meant to kill her. But she was gone. The room was suffocatingly quiet. The ocean outside continued its rhythmic song, mocking the horror inside the villa. Then. A knock at the door. The air inside the villa was thick with death. The overpowering scent of blood and sweat hung in the silence, wrapping itself around Omari Langston like a suffocating fog. He stood frozen, staring down at Zaire's lifeless body, his hands trembling, stained deep red. His wife. His beautiful, deceitful wife. Gone. His breath came in short, uneven gasps. His heart slammed against his ribs. What had he done? A sharp knock at the door. "Mr. Langston." The voice was cautious, hesitant. Omari didn't move. Another knock, louder this time. "Mr. Langston, are you all right?" Still, he said nothing. His gaze remained locked on Zaire's motionless form. Her once glowing skin was now pale, marred with bruises and deep gashes. Her lips, which had once whispered sweet lies into his ear, were slightly parted, frozen in one last gasp of terror. Then, the unmistakable click of a key turning in the lock. Omari barely had time to process before the door swung open. Kiran Patel, the night attendant, stepped inside. And froze. His breath hitched. His stomach dropped. For a moment, he couldn't move. Couldn't think. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Blood. So much blood. Splattered across the pristine white sheets, smeared across the polished marble floor. And at the center of it all. Zaire Monroe. Dead. Omari stood over her, his body rigid, his face blank, his hands trembling. Guilty. Kiran's instincts screamed at him to run. But instead, his hand shot to his radio. "This is Kiran, I need security and emergency services at Villa 8. Now." He didn't wait for a response. His shaking fingers pulled his cell phone from his pocket, pressing 911. "911, what's your emergency?" He swallowed hard, his pulse hammering. "Honeymoon Resort, Villa 8. There's been an incident. A woman, she's not breathing. She's dead." His voice cracked on the last word. Omari still didn't move. Didn't try to run. Didn't beg for help. Didn't even acknowledge Kiran's presence. He just stood there, staring down at Zaire, his expression unreadable. The operator's voice rang in Kiran's ear. "Is the suspect still on the scene?" Kiran's mouth went dry. His eyes flickered toward Omari. Suspect. He had admired Omari Langston once. The millionaire. The businessman. The powerful, polished husband to one of the most famous women on the internet. Now, he was just a murderer standing in the ruins of his perfect life. "Yes," Kiran whispered. "He's still here." By morning, the world knew. Breaking news, social media star Zaire Monroe found dead on honeymoon. Husband arrested. Mogul Omari Langston detained after shocking homicide. Honeymoon horror. Zaire Monroe murdered. From Los Angeles to New York, London to Dubai, headlines spread like wildfire. Every major news outlet covered the story. Every gossip blog dissected the details. Millions of fans flooded the internet, demanding answers. But the biggest bombshell came when the video leaked. Zaire. Tariq. The betrayal. The night before the wedding. The intimate moans. The heated whispers. The way she gave herself to another man. It divided the internet in half. Some saw Omari as a cold-blooded killer. No excuse. Cheating doesn't justify murder. He's a monster. Others saw him as a broken man, pushed too far. What she did was disgusting. She embarrassed him in front of the whole world. He snapped. Who wouldn't? Twitter. Instagram. TikTok. Facebook. The comments flooded in. Hashtag Justice for Zaire trended alongside hashtag Free Omari. Some called it a crime of passion. Some called it premeditated murder. Some called it karma. But one thing was certain. No one would ever look at Zaire Monroe and Omari Langston the same way again. The courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that felt heavy, suffocating, pressing against Omari Langston's chest like a weight he couldn't shake. He stood at the defendant's table, dressed in a sharp navy suit, wrists shackled in silver cuffs. The once powerful businessman, the man who had commanded boardrooms and sealed multi-million-dollar deals with a single handshake, was now just another accused murderer awaiting his fate. The judge, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, looked over the courtroom before speaking. Omari Langston, you stand before this court accused of the murder of your wife, Zaire Monroe Langston. The jury has deliberated. Before I read the final sentence, does the defendant have anything to say? Omari's mouth felt dry. His throat burned. What could he say? That he regretted it? That he hadn't meant to kill her? That the rage had blinded him, consumed him, twisted him into something unrecognizable? Or that, deep down, he still loved her? He gripped the wooden podium, his knuckles turning white. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse. I never wanted this. His gaze swept the room, over the jury, the reporters, Zaire's grieving parents, his own devastated mother and father. I loved my wife. Despite everything, I loved her. But in that moment, I saw nothing but betrayal. I lost control. And for that, I will never forgive myself. His mother, Vanessa Langston, stifled a sob in the front row. Her husband, Malcolm Langston, sat beside her, his face carved from stone. He hadn't spoken to Omari since the night of the murder. On the other side of the courtroom, Zaire's parents sat stiffly, their faces a mixture of fury and grief. Tasha Monroe, her mother, had once adored Omari, had gushed about him to her friends, bragged about the powerful man her daughter had married. Now, she looked at him like he was a disease. Next to her, Randall Monroe's hands were clenched into fists. His only daughter, his pride and joy, was gone. And sitting just a few seats away, in a sleek designer dress and a calculated expression, was Imani Foster. The best friend who had started it all. The woman who had leaked the video. Omari's eyes locked on her, and for a split second, something flickered across her face. Was it guilt? Satisfaction? Or just cold, calculated indifference? The judge's gavel slammed against the desk, snapping Omari back to reality. The court has reviewed all evidence, the testimony, and the arguments presented by both the prosecution and the defense. While the crime committed was one of passion and impulse, it does not change the fact that a life was taken. Mr. Langston, the law does not operate on emotion. It operates on justice. I hereby sentence you to 25 years to life in state prison. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Vanessa Langston broke into full sobs. Tasha Monroe closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Randall Monroe exhaled sharply, his grief momentarily overshadowed by relief. Omari's heart pounded. 25 years. He would be 56 when he got out. If he ever got out. As the guards moved toward him, ready to take him away, his gaze drifted to the audience one last time. His mother's tear-streaked face. His father's blank stare. Zaire's parents, still mourning the loss of a daughter who had once seemed untouchable. And finally, Imani. She met his stare, lips curving into the faintest smirk. Then, she turned away. Omari let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. And as the guards led him from the courtroom, the weight of everything he had lost settled fully onto his shoulders. His life, his freedom, his future. All gone. Because of one night. Because of one moment of rage. And because of a woman he had loved, but never truly knew. One night of betrayal. One moment of blind rage. A love story turned into a cautionary tale. Omari Langston had it all, wealth, power, and a woman the world envied. But beneath the surface of their picture-perfect romance lay secrets, deception, and a betrayal that would ignite a storm of violence. Zaire Monroe had lived a life of luxury, but she played a dangerous game. A game that, in the end, cost her everything. Now, one life was lost. Another was wasted behind bars. Omari sat in his prison cell, staring at the cold concrete walls. He replayed that night over and over in his mind. The moment he saw the video. The way the rage had taken over. The way her body had gone still. Would things have been different if he had walked away? If he had confronted her with words instead of fists? If he had never opened that message at all? Or had fate already written this ending long before they ever said, "I do"? The world debated his guilt. Was Omari a monster, or a man driven to madness? Could this tragedy have been avoided if the truth had come out sooner? Some saw him as a murderer, an abuser who had no right to take a life. Others saw him as a broken man who had snapped in a moment of unbearable pain. In the end, the only thing that remained was the brutal reality: 2 lives destroyed, all because of love, lies, and the deadly consequences of betrayal. If this story shocked you, like and subscribe for more tales of love, lies, and deadly consequences.